Hello students, this is Dr. Winkler again, coming to you from the magic world of recorded lectures. This is the Ancient Civilization course, and this is lecture number 10. I don't know about you, but I'm having a great day. My son came to see me, and he subscribes to a streaming service called Netflix. He found out he can add it to me without charge. I watch very little on TV, but it's kind of nice to know that's out there anyway. Well, let's continue with our discussion here. We're talking about Buddhism. Remember, Buddhism is a reform movement in Hinduism, where it changes things a little bit. Remember the Siddhartha Gautama sitting underneath a tree, got enlightened, and saw the impermanence of all things. When he became enlightened, he became the Buddha, the enlightened one. Basic idea, we need to scorn desire and seek good. There is no rebirth. You're not reborn. You don't come back. This is your life. Now, what happens to you after death? Nirvana, state of peace. Now, how do you achieve what you should in your life? The mechanism is at the beginning to understand the Four Noble Truths. Have I got Buddha covered up over here? Shame on me. You need to look at the gold Buddha and at least appreciate the gold. Gold is one of my favorite colors. It's one of my favorite objects too. The more gold I have, the happier I happen to be. However, I have no gold right now, but yeah, that can change. Let's hope it does. At least I get monetary value for gold. Okay, Four Noble Truths. I've already mentioned this. I'm going to simplify this. The Four Noble Truths and then the Eightfold Path. They are so repetitive. I know there's difference in nuance, but they're so repetitive, I'm not going to say bink, 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 bink. And you'll sit there and say, I can count to 4, but I don't think he can. By the way, I can count to 8, but he can't either. Okay, I'm pretty good at that. 4 is easy, but 8 is doable. Well, the Four Noble Truths. Remember, I'm combining these. If you want to look at them, I pulled this up a few minutes ago. The Four Noble Truths, truth of suffering, truth of the cause of suffering, truth of the end of suffering, and truth of the path. In other words, the Eightfold Path. But let's go over and see what this life is pain. Is that what we're saying? Yes, life is pain. That is something you should understand. The nature of life is pain. The nature of life is suffering. But from what do we get pain, and from what do we get suffering? Pain is from desire. Pain is from greed. Pain is from egoism. You know what that means? If you're egoistic, boy, you think you are the top person. You are just so cool. Why do these things cause pain? A lot of time in our society, Western society, we expect people to have ambitions, to have goals. And the idea of going after money, sometimes we call this capitalism, is not necessarily a bad idea. And shouldn't you feel good about yourself? Don't you accomplish more if you have very strong self-esteem? We say Buddhism is a different emphasis. Pain from desire. I want something. What do I want? I want gold. Okay. The more gold, the merrier. The more money, the merrier. The bigger house, the better car. I want to travel. Does that really make you happy? Well, according to Buddha, it really doesn't. It makes you unhappy. Because your desires are something that are impractical. The things that can't be fulfilled. The government is never going to go over to Fort Knox in Kentucky, bring out a bunch of gold bullion and drop them into my safety deposit box. That's not going to happen. But I want it to happen. If I do want it to happen, I'm frustrated. Does that make me feel good? Frustration does not make you feel good. When you have desires, particularly lofty desires, that's hurtful. Greed. Is there ever enough? Do you ever really have enough? I mean, everybody's got their needs. Well, I shouldn't say everybody has. Most people in our society, I'm very fortunate to say, are doing quite well. I mean, they're getting by. They pay their rent. They've got clothing. They've got food. And they're investing in their future by taking classes at UVU. But don't we want more? Oh, we want more. I've got my house down here. I look up on the bench in Provo or Orem. I go up there and go, wow, look at those houses. My goodness, they're huge. Some of those houses up there are so big, you could play basketball on their living room floor because you got enough space to have a full court press. That's greed. If I lived in that house, maybe I'd want more and more. A friend of mine, he's retired now, but he was living in California around Sacramento, and he worked for the government of the state of California. He was an investigator. He's investigating what we call white-collar crime. The people who steal from their businesses, the people who underpay their workers and overcharge for their products. When they break the law, then his investigative group would go after them and shut them down or get them prosecuted or fined. I remember asking him, who does this? He says, you think it's the poor people who commit crime, at least at the level of his investigation. It was not the poor people that are committing crime. It's the rich people. You can only occupy so much space. I can only wear one pair of shoes at a time. I can only drive one car at a time. If I have 10 cars, what do? Look at them. It's cool. But see, so many people want more. Greed is one of those things that can never really be fulfilled. So it is just a matter of causing yourself needless pain and suffering. Egoism. Egoism to feel good about yourself. And I believe strongly, if you have a good self-image, if you think good things about yourself, if inside you there is a little voice that's talking to you all the time saying, you can do it. It might be hard. It might take a while, but you can do it. You see, his idea is that when you feel good about yourself, you are going to be frustrated to a certain level. Because no matter how good you feel about yourself, you should feel better. I should be more competent. I should be braver. So this is an aspect that can cause you pain and suffering. So, shall we say wisdom? The wisdom of the religion is to overcome desire. See, all of these things are an aspect of desire, are they not? It is wisdom to overcome desire. And how do you do that? Well, you use the Eightfold Path. Once again, don't count because I'm going to come up short. It won't be the same number. We can pull these up if we like. Notice it's depicted over here as a wheel. And as you can see, there are 8 spokes to the wheel. And you can see right-mindedness, right effort, right livelihood, right view, right resolve, right speech, right conduct. And whatever this is, right samadhi, which I don't really know what that is. Okay, let's go to the Eightfold Path. We say right view might include understanding suffering, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood. We can cause ourselves pain and suffering if we do not watch what we say. If we say things that are outlandish, or we exaggerate, or we put people down, that doesn't make you feel good. Right speech is very important. Conduct. What do you do? I mean, should I? Nobody's watching. I should kick a dog, or I should do things that are unscrupulous, maybe even illegal, maybe immoral, that kind of thing. Is that going to make me happy? No, no, no. Right conduct. A very moral religion. You restrict your conduct in a certain manner. It's going to cause you less pain and less frustration because you're doing the right thing. Right livelihood and endeavor. Livelihood. Is that how you make your living? The job? Shouldn't you choose to do things that are more suited to you? Are there ever times, going back to egoism, that you want a job where there's prestige? Want a job where there's money? And maybe you are very well suited to that job. It would be a good choice. On the other hand, if you're not suited toward that job, you're leading yourself to pain and suffering. I have an example. Years ago, there was a colleague of mine. He had an office next to mine. And a gentleman would come and see him. It seemed like every so often. I never got to know this guy. But once in a while, he came by and said, oh, by the way, I wanted to see Brian. I said, I'm sorry, I haven't seen him myself. He must have stepped out. And this gentleman would come back and say, well, would you tell him, and he gave me his name, would you tell him that I was here and I'll come back and see him another time. Of course, that's a very easy message to hand on. And I was happy to do that. Over a period of time, my friend in the office next to mine, Brian, gave me a brief explanation as to who this guy was. They've known each other for decades. They're old friends. They go way back. And why does his friend come and see him? Well, it's always nice to come and see a friend, renew a friendship, you have things in common. But he said the guy would come in, and I did notice this guy would come into Brian's office and close the door. And he said, Brian said his friend would cry. Now, men don't like to cry very much. It's kind of embarrassing. We don't like to cry in public. We don't like to cry in front of other men. So this guy's pretty hurting to cry. The man is a medical doctor, and he hates it. Doesn't like doing it. Unfortunately, on top of that, he's got a bad marriage. So he's got two problems here. He's unhappy. There are people that would do almost anything, lie, cheat, and steal if you had to get into medical school so bad you want to be a doctor. This man obviously had some intellect and ability. He's obviously a very good student to get into medical school and to get through it. But can we say he chose the right, excuse me, I said that wrong. He chose the wrong livelihood if he's have something that makes him so very, very unhappy. Is there something else he could have done? I have no idea. He might have enjoyed chemistry or molecular biology. There's a number of other things he could have done. But he chose something that was the wrong livelihood for him. The prestige and the money does not make up for his unhappiness. Right endeavor? I guess endeavor and occupation can be something quite similar, can they not? I mean, isn't your occupation, your livelihood, isn't that something involving endeavor? It's something you have to do. You have to get up in the morning, you have to go down to the job, you have to perform certain functions, and then you have to go home. That is an endeavor. But endeavor can be wider than an occupation, can't it? Yes, certainly can. Do you want to coach a soccer team? Is that a right endeavor? Well, if you like doing it and you do good for the kids, that might be a pretty good idea, something pretty good to do. You might be involved in helping the environment. Those are good endeavors. Right awareness, let's go back over here. Right awareness and contemplation. You need to be aware of the nature of the universe. You need to be aware of your pain and suffering. You need to be aware of the kinds of things that you're doing wrong and the kinds of things you need to be doing right. You need to be aware of the world around you, and you need to have contemplation. That's sitting down and thinking it through. You should be able to think about the situation using your basic understanding of the Eightfold Path. and come up with, shall we say, improved solutions. Maybe you're already doing very well, but the contemplation would allow you to keep on doing well. So this kind of thing can be really quite helpful. Is it a good idea to examine ourselves? I think it is. It's easy for me, and I'm sure for other people as well, to be, I call it go with the flow. This is what I was taught. Everybody, this is what everybody believes. Why should I re-examine it? Why should I examine myself? Why should I ask myself the hard questions? Am I doing the right thing? Am I focusing my life in the right direction? Is there some way I could improve what I'm doing? Is there some way I can do it better? Rather than just say, why bother? I'm lazy, I'm tired, don't want to do it. Right contemplation. And something else is the impermanence of all things. When you put your heart and your effort in that which is impermanent, that, shall we say, like the job, the money, prestige, all those kinds of things, they all literally melt away, and they're relatively meaningless. Impermanence of all things. Conduct yourself properly. I'm such a Westerner. I'm kind of ridiculous, actually. Once in a while I get a chance to travel. I like traveling. It broadens your horizons, and sometimes if there's a historical site involved or an art museum, hey, I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to go down there and take a look. It's a lot of fun to travel. It's slightly disconcerting, but it is also the adventure. One of the great adventures I think we have in the modern world. When I go in to a hotel room, motel, whatever, and one of the first things I do is entertain myself. Nowadays we can listen to audiobooks on our smartphones. I always have an audiobook sitting on my smartphone, put a button, and I listen to something. If I'm not doing that, there's usually a radio, as you know, in a hotel room, motel room, to go in and try to find a good old classic rock and roll station. I haven't been quite successful in that anymore because classic rock and roll is getting so old that nobody wants, people like me are not up buying a lot of things anymore. And so they don't sell it advertising. So a lot of times those old classic rock and roll stations aren't out there anymore. I'll turn on television. How about the local weather? How about the local news? That can be very interesting. But see, when you're talking about right contemplation and you surround yourself with stimuli, are you actually afraid to be alone? You're afraid to be alone with yourself? You're afraid to be alone with your thoughts? You're afraid to contemplate where you're at and where you're going? If I'm listening to rock and roll, I'm probably not monitoring myself well enough. See, being so Western, sometimes I don't appreciate this as well as I should. But in reality, they have something which I think is valuable to us. Let me tell you a story about Buddhism. I had a friend by the name of James L. Gardner. And he was a fascinating man, fun guy, got a great sense of humor. Unfortunately, he didn't take good care of himself, and he died just a couple of years ago. But for many years, going back a few decades, we were pretty good friends. We'd often talk on the phone. Once in a while, I'd go see him. He's a wonderful sponge. This guy was so good. Well, come and see me. Let's go to lunch. And of course, I'm by. I'm not big in eating out, but sure, he's my friend. I'll go out and I'll pay for lunch. It was really kind of nice. Fascinating man. He had a number of experiences. In the early era of Vietnam, he was sent over there as combat troops in Vietnam. Actually, I'm being a little bit misleading because he did spend time in Vietnam, but he spent a lot of time in Laos. Now, according to the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, the president had authority to support Vietnam. However, having troops in Laos was illegal. But we're there, we're fighting, we're monitoring what's coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He seemed surprised when he mentioned this. He says, yeah, I knew we had men in Laos. He says, well, that was illegal. I says, yeah, I know that too. But that's not, he's not the first person I ever talked to about Vietnam. And he's also not I've also done a bunch of reading on it. In fact, I did teach the Vietnam course once on campus. So I think my knowledge is, shall we say, a little bit beyond just simply conversational. I know a few things. Well, why did they send this guy to Laos? He had some university education. I think his father was a businessman, so he spent some time in Burma. And over here in Burma, he learned something about the culture. Now, Burma and Laos aren't the same countries, but they do have some similarities in culture, one of which is Buddhism. He's in the army, but he's technically working for the CIA. Kind of an awkward scenario. Anyway, you go into Laos, and they sent him into Laos because he knew a little bit of some of the languages around there. He told good stories about misunderstandings when he's talking to people. But he's also there because he's supposed to understand something about Buddhism, that he can talk to these people and relate to them and help convince them that they want to support the U.S. military effort and not the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese that are using Laos frequently. So, well, he tells a good story about combat. They're attacking a village. He made a mistake. He went too close to a hut. The hut collapsed on him and it broke his arm. It's a compound fracture. In fact, he said part of the bone on his arm was protruding from the flesh. Whoa! Well, what do you do when you're wounded in Vietnam? You call for medevac, you call for a helicopter to come in and get you out. But remember, he's not supposed to be in Vietnam. Excuse me, I said that wrong, didn't I? He's not supposed to be in Laos. So when it comes to this position, he calls for medevac, get me out of here, I'm in a world of hurts. The helicopters didn't come. I said, what did you do? He says, I walked out. 3 days. And I go, whoa. Well, you see, he told me this story in bits and pieces over a lengthy period of time. I naturally assumed they shot him up. They gave him a shot of morphine. I don't know if any of you have ever had morphine. I'm not sure I've had morphine. But one time I was in the hospital. I think the nurses got tired of me walking outside because they wanted me for tests. They gave me a shot of something that blitzed me out. Man, I felt virtually nothing. I fell flat asleep on the bed. I think that was morphine. I've seen morphine administered to other people, and it blitzes them out. You go to sleep. It's not a bad situation to be in if you're potentially in pain. He said, you can't give me morphine because then I can't walk. You mean you walk out for 3 days and you are not blitzed out? You get to feel everything? There's been a few times I have some back problems. Very fortunately, chiropractors and I get along very well. And without them, I'd probably be living in a life of pain. However, I do have chiropractors. But there have been times before I got myself adjusted when the pain is severe enough that every time I take a step, it hurts my back. Now, I haven't been through what he's been through, but I can imagine with this kind of a problem, with a protruding bone, compound fracture, possibility of bugs, that every time he takes a step or makes a movement, he's got a problem. He might have a shot of pain. A very interesting question, which I like to ask him. How did you stand it? He put it this way. I'm paraphrasing. Thank heaven, or I appreciate my Buddhist master. The guy who taught him about Buddhism, apparently when he was in Burma. His Buddhist master. See, let's go back to the idea of the impermanence of all things. The thing around you doesn't really matter. It's really impermanent anyway. You see, if I'd have been in that situation, I'd have gone stark raving mad. All kinds of things would have been in my brain. I'm going to lose my arm. I'm going to die. The pain will go on indefinitely. there's no hope. He said, don't do that to yourself. That's not your problem. You're not going to die. You might lose your arm, but not now. You have one problem. Do not compound it. The problem is in your arm. That's it. Anything beyond that is really doing yourself a disservice. Now, you'd have to have enormous mental control to be able to not let your mind wander. But he said that was a very helpful philosophy for him. He says there's something else. Take your psychic energy and focus on your problem. You have one problem. That's your problem. The pain in your arm is your problem. So try to take your psychic energy, concentrate on the one problem which you have, and try to figure out a way to reduce the pain, at least in your mind. Well, it seemed to work because he didn't go stark raving mad, and he did survive. Of course, over time, I asked him other questions. He said, I said, was there anything else? He says, well, of course. It's not the only thing you have in your mind. Even though he was taught Buddhism, he was a believing Christian. And he said it was comforting to him to think this, that Jesus suffered for my sins. Jesus suffered as well, which helped him to tolerate it a lot better. He got back to Vietnam. They patched him up. They fixed the bone. They didn't take his arm off. So it's a pretty good success story. But let me tell you something, the follow-up story on this, shall we say. He was in a grocery store, decades, years and years later. He's in a grocery store. And he's really embarrassed. He's standing in line. The guy has rung him up, and he doesn't have enough money. He looks at his wallet, I don't have enough money. He was short 42 cents. And he turned to the woman who's standing in line right behind him. Said, could you give me 42 cents? And she said this, why should I give you 42 cents? He always wore long sleeve shirts to cover up the scars. Anyway, he had his long sleeve shirt there. He rolled up his sleeve, showed her the scars on his arms. And he said, I did this for you in Vietnam. He got the 42 cents. See how this can work in a practical manner. If you believe that impermanence of all things and you shouldn't have a large ego, how about self-depreciation? Shouldn't you run yourself down? Another friend of mine spent some time in the Orient, speaks Chinese. And I don't know how we ever got on this, some kind of silly conversation, how we got on this, and he was talking about applying for jobs in Japan. Now, he's a computer programmer, and I would guess he's very, very good at it. Are you familiar with the game the Japanese like to play called Go, where you have black and white beads and you move them around? I have no idea what it is. I have no idea how to win. All I know is it's one of these brain games. And brain games can be extremely complicated. He told me that he wrote a Go program that in a contest took like third place. Whoa, I was impressed. Unfortunately, the next time he didn't do nearly that well. But obviously this guy's a computer programmer. He's something of a brainiac. And his interest in Go would obviously lead me to the next question. Are you interested in Japan? Well, of course he is. And he told me, he was thinking about making an application to work for a company in Japan. Now that's challenging because usually Japanese don't like foreigners coming live in their country. The people in Japan are almost 100% Japanese. They're not like the United States where everybody is coming from someplace else. He said the way you apply for a job is you run yourself down. You say, oh, I am such a low life. I'm just inadequate. I can't imagine I'm even applying to for your job. But if you would lower yourself and come down and just look at my application, even though it's inadequate and I'm not very good. Really? Usually when we're writing our resume or our vitae, to apply for a job in the United States, you talk yourself up. Man, I'm good. My education is stunning. Boy, if you miss me, you imply this. If you miss me, man, you're missing a treat. No, no, you don't do that over there because it's too egotistical. Self-depreciation, put yourself down. Many years ago at the Academy Awards, and I've got to tell you this much about me. Everybody likes the popular media. Everybody likes motion pictures. I do too. I like knowing about them. But I don't really see very many motion pictures. For whatever reason, I guess just my quirk and my personality. Every year, I try to make it a point to watch the Academy Awards. There are many years when I'm watching the Academy Awards. Of course, you know there's numerous categories, and then there's a number of nominations in each category. There are years where I'm watching this, and I haven't seen any film that's nominated for anything in the entire program. That's how much motion pictures I see. I like to read movie reviews. I like to watch movie reviews. I look at them in the newspaper, but I don't see very many films. But I watch the Academy Awards. That's my point. One of the greatest filmmakers in the history of cinema is a Japanese filmmaker by the name of Akira Kurosawa. If you're big into motion pictures, you've probably heard of him. I can only remember seeing one film by him. It's called The Seven Samurai, which is a black and white film made back in the 50s. I think it's a stunning piece of work, though I'm not a good film critic. But his body of work is huge. I'm not sure all of them have been made available in the United States, even reading undertitles. But his body of work is huge and it's very impressive. Brilliant cinematography, good plots, good pacing, all those qualities that are going to make a great motion picture. So I think the Academy Awards did a very good job. They gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award, which they don't give to very many filmmakers or very many actors and actresses. Once in a while they do. It would have been a crime had they not done this. So the Academy Awards in 1990, they invited Akira Kurosawa to come over and to give him this great honor. This is one of the greatest honors the Academy can bestow on anybody. As I remember, they showed a few clips from his films, most of which I'd never heard of and almost all of which I'd never seen. But then he came up and gave an acceptance speech. His English wasn't good enough, he didn't speak English at all. So it was given in Japanese. And there was a translator there that translated for him. After they showed all these films, Akira Kurosawa got up and said, "After all these efforts, I don't think I have yet to understand the real skill and talent involved in making films." Words to that effect. As I recall, there was kind of a guffaw that went over the audience, kind of a what kind of thing. My memory is very bad. It's been a long time ago. There might have been a few chuckles or a small laugh. But I do remember a guffaw. At least I think I do. And I remember being embarrassed. Americans, don't you know anything about foreign culture? Don't you know anything about Buddhism? Don't you know anything about Japan? Why would you laugh at a man who's being culturally and, shall I say, religiously consistent with where he comes from? We do need to understand these people are self-depreciating. And that's part of Buddhism. Well, good overcomes evil. Do Christians believe that? Yes, they do. Do good to those who despitefully use you. This is a similarity between Buddhism and Christianity. Good overcomes evil. Be honest. Ooh, honesty is challenging, isn't it? Why are we ever dishonest? We don't want to be punished, right? If you do something wrong, or you haven't done something, it's hard to be honest about it because you don't want to take the rap for it. So honesty is something they emphasize. Do not steal and do not lie. Well, being honest means you don't lie. Simple theft, stealing, shouldn't do that. Do not drink alcohol. Don't go over to a Buddhist country walk into a bar and order a beer, you probably won't get one, let alone hard liquor. So that's something else that you really do not see in Buddhist culture. Be chaste, okay. You're not a flander, you don't goof off, and you don't horse around with other people. I talked to you about already, so I'm repeating myself. There is no caste system at all within Buddhism religion. Everybody is essentially, shall we say, equal in society and equal in the eyes of the deity. It's also a missionary faith. We tend to see something common in missionary faiths, and that is it's pretty easy to join. Christianity is a very famous missionary faith. They've been sending missionaries out for ever since Pentecost, after Jesus ascended into heaven in the first part of the book of Acts. What does he tell the apostles? Spread the word. Missionary faith, you go out and convert people. It does depend on which Christian religion you happen to be following. But there's usually a statement of faith. I accept Jesus as my maker. It can be something, and Jesus died for my sins. It can be something that's similar. Some other faiths want you to have, shall we say, more careful understanding. And then, of course, there's the baptism, the sacrament of baptism. And then you become a member of the faith. Now, there's a little bit involved in that, but it's not terribly challenging. However, Buddhism is another missionary faith. And this missionary faith, there's no doctrines you have to understand. It'd be nice if you did understand these things. And there's no ritual washing. There's nothing you go through to become part of the faith. If you want to be a Buddhist, you're a Buddhist. Wow, that's pretty easy to do. Pretty easy to spread the faith. Well, the people that understand Buddhism better than I do talk about the Buddha telling people to scorn prayer. You see, to me, there's something that virtually all religions have in common, and that is praising God. Scorn prayer. One of the reasons why you scorn prayer is that doesn't make any difference. What you have to do is take upon yourself to do the right thing. And prayer doesn't necessarily help because the deity will not help you. You've got to do it yourself. If you divide up Buddhism, some scholars would say this. You say so many places where you act like there is no soul. In reality, is there a soul? I know I said there is a state of peace, which they call nirvana. But is there a soul? Is there an existence in any form? Is it just a state of mind rather than saying you actually have a soul? Going back to the idea of scorning prayer. Will God interact with you? Well, it's almost like there's nothing there to interact with you. It's very challenging in some respects as we take a look at Buddhism. But in reality, it is one of the major religions in the world. And there are many devoted adherents to it. And it really has made a difference in the world, largely in East Asia, Southeast Asia. Well, I know I mentioned this to you already, that our instructions are that we should make about 30% of this course on Africa and Asia, and the rest should be on Europe. Well, I think I've exceeded 30%, more like a third, talking about Asia. But now we need to shift. We need to shift directions. At this point, there's a major dividing line in this class, where now we're going to start talking about Europe, largely known as Western civilization. And our first point of discussion will be Greece. What's the importance of Greece to Western civilization? It's fundamental. Almost every aspect of Western civilization, from philosophy to religion to science to various art forms, including literature, drama, philosophy, how we think about the world, architecture and art, sometimes directly and sometimes not so directly, but virtually all of it. There are other influences, I'm not saying they're not, but virtually all of it, the vast majority of it, can be traced right back to Greece. So we need to take a look at Greece for a fundamental understanding of our civilization. Before we get deep into Greece, let's talk about Greece as far as two eras are concerned. The historians and art critics, other people as well, have tended to divide the history of Greece into two eras. The first is the Hellenic. The Greeks don't call themselves Greeks, they call themselves Hellenes. So if you're talking about Greece, and sometimes Hellenic means Greece proper. I'm not saying there aren't outside influences, but I am saying that in what we call the Hellenic, there is a very strong tendency for Greek civilization, philosophy, science, and everything else to develop from its own resources. That actually the Greeks are feeding themselves, talking to various people within city-states, talking themselves between city-states. Until you get to the Macedonian conquest. We'll talk about this later. The Macedonians are people who speak a Greek dialect. They live just north of what you and I call the Peloponnesian Peninsula, just north of Greece proper. And a man by the name of Philip of Macedonia, or Philip of Macedon, who had a young son by the name of Alexander, who will later be known as Alexander the Great, came down in 338 BC and conquered the entire peninsula and placed it under the authority of the Macedonians. Now, a couple of years later, it was 336, when Philip was probably assassinated, when Philip dies. Then his son, Alexander, decides this guy's got ambition galore. He's going to conquer the Persian Empire, which is enormous. He and his father's already conquered Greece, but now we're going to conquer the Anatolian Peninsula, Turkey. We're going to conquer Syria. We're going to conquer Palestine. We're going to conquer Egypt. We're going to conquer Mesopotamia. And that's just getting started because we're going to march all the way over to India. When this happens, we see Greek civilization going in one direction. But we also see these numerous other civilizations, which are extremely important, such as Egypt, influencing Greeks. So now we have the second period of Greek history. We call it the Hellenistic. Hellenistic is largely Greek-like. So we have Hellenic, largely Greece, Hellenistic, Greek-like. In other words, there are larger numbers of influences on Greek civilization. Of course, Greek civilization is now making a big impact on other cultures as well. Now to the Roman conquest. I hesitate to give you that date because in 146 BC is when the Roman Empire finally decided that they were going to now take Greece proper. Does that really change what's going on? Well, and I'll talk about this later. The Romans are very good in borrowing, or shall we say stealing, however you want to look at it, the various forms of Greek civilization. Now, that's Greece proper. But Rome does not control the Eastern Mediterranean entirely. In fact, it's really not until another 100 years where the Romans are actually in control of Egypt, which by this time frame had been part of the Hellenistic, and they were having the Greek-like area, Greek-like culture. So what I'm saying is that yes, this is the conquest, if you will, of Greece proper, but conquering the area of the Hellenistic, these other areas, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, that comes later. Two basic time frames. Well, in Greece, we start out with what we call the polis. Polis is a Greek word for the city. It's the city. Can I give you a map of Greece? It's very helpful to understand. Let's take a look at Greece topography and see if we can get a pretty good statement on that. Yeah, which is the best one here? Is that one going to be helpful? Notice that, and this is actually what we call Greece proper. This is the Aegean down here, the Aegean Sea. Of course, the Mediterranean is out here. The Greek civilization is not just over here. The people that live on this area, Western Anatolia, are often referred to as the Ionian Greeks. So even though we look at a political map of modern Greece, we're talking about this. However, if we're talking about the civilization, the culture, particularly ancient Greece, we have to include the Ionian Greeks, which are over here, in what you and I would call the western part of Turkey. The topographical map, you get an idea that, can we say this is hill country? Is that one going to be more helpful? Probably not as much so. Let's go back to this one. Can you see as we take a look at this that there's hills everywhere? And of course, we have a tendency to see people living not on the top of hills, but down in the valleys or the space between the hills. We have Athens, which is over here, which is in Attica. Sparta is down here. See, Sparta's kind of hemmed in by hills on both sides. Later on, they're going to go over here and conquer this area, which makes them a much more powerful state. But I'm trying to give you an idea that in, shall we say, the vast majority, almost every place where you have a city-state, it's within the confines of an area that has hills. And that simply defines the polis, this city-state. Even as we look at the various valleys, the various spaces between the hills, they're not entirely smooth. We do have a tendency to see that there are, well, there's going to be bumps, ridges, or hills inside of these, where you're going to put your fortress if you're threatened by external invasion, somebody coming over the hills to take you out. Well, you're going to put your fortress on the higher level because it's harder for them to attack uphill. And when you throw your rocks down on them, the rocks tend to sail a little while farther. And you put a wall on top of a hill, you got a pretty good fortress. So in the center of many of these city-states, we have an acropolis, the high point of the city. And later on, this is where a lot of times where public monuments were set up. The most famous acropolis of all is in Athens because it has some of the most brilliant architecture in ancient Greece. And I'm talking in this case about the Parthenon. We shouldn't think in terms about this place being terribly united. Yeah, the people came in, the migrants came in. There were the Mycenaean Greeks, later on the Dorian Greeks came in. Well, we'll talk all about that as we progress with this lecture. But as people come in, they do have a similar culture. But political unity is very hard to come by. Can we say if you want a state that taxes and gives you money for monuments, or you provide for the common defense, that a unified state is a good idea? One of the problems throughout literally the Hellenic period is that Greece is threatened. Sometimes there are invasions, but threatened by wars and invasions. Sometimes the most difficult of all wars are civil wars where the Greeks are fighting among themselves. Had you had a unified state, that would have been, well, would have been very, very much more challenging. You'd be able to defend yourself better, and you have probably less problems with civil wars. So why doesn't the Greeks unify? There is something about Greek mentality. In fact, the Greek word for unity, I think, is related to chain. So if you're unified, you're like a link in a chain. And the implication, if you will, that you chain slaves, that when you're chaining yourself together, you're losing some of your freedoms in the process. Another issue is going back to topography, geography, the lay of the land. If you live in a flat plain, like we've seen in Mesopotamia, like we see in Egypt, it's relatively easy to have unity because there really aren't very, very many physical barriers. Physical barriers in Greece are a real problem because there are hills that, shall we say, form boundaries of the various city-states. Hills don't mean an awful lot to us unless you're trying to get in shape. You get out in the morning, get out there, and you want a really good workout, well, why don't you run up the side of the hill? Whenever I want to go to Heber City, which is very rarely, I hop in the old Buick and just put the hammer down, and I'm up there in a half hour. See, that is if you have modern conveniences. Since we have so many modern conveniences for transportation, we sometimes forget how challenging it is to go from place to place if you have to walk, particularly if you have to walk up and down. I already mentioned in a different context the various neighborhoods of San Francisco, Chinatown, Italian areas as well. One of the reasons why you tend to have these little enclaves is there are hills in San Francisco. There's hills all over the town. And if you live in one place, the effort to simply go over a hill to another neighborhood is probably prohibitive. You're not going to do it very often. Of course, San Francisco gets cable cars. Stunning technical invention for the time frame. And when you have that, and then you can move from neighborhood to neighborhood. There's no such thing as this in ancient Greece. Simply because of the division of the land. The nature of the land, people are going to be less united. Simply because it's more difficult to go from one place over to another place. The first civilizations in what you and I would call Greece are the Aegean civilizations. Remember early on I said that this is the Aegean Sea. So we have the Ionian Greeks here. We have people that are Greeks living around here and around here. Of course, Greece civilization is going to include all this area as well. But the Aegean civilizations are largely around here. And the first European civilization are the Minoans. Should I give you a map of Minoans? The Minoans usually have a civilization. Let's get this map up here first. That is based around Crete. What I think I'm showing you here is Minoan and Mycenaean. Crete right here, let's get a larger map of Crete. Along this area was the first civilization, first European civilization. Because technically speaking, Crete is, though it's an island in the Mediterranean and the Aegean, it is also geographically associated with Europe. So it's the first European civilization. What do we know about them? Well, we know a few things. Have advanced jewelry. Let's get Minoan jewelry up here. These have been found in tombs. You can't quite see it on this photograph. I'm not sure I can get you one that's enlarged enough to actually show you the intricacy of this. You probably can't see it. So let me try to describe it for you. These are obviously two bees. Notice what we have down here. We have tiny beads of gold. Tiny, little bitty beads of gold. And this is a process that the jewelers call granulation. We actually take a very, very small piece of gold. By heating it a certain manner, it kind of becomes a droplet, kind of like a teeny tiny blob. You can't see this, but as these bands that are around the abdomen of the bee are also granulated, small little pieces of gold. By any standards, by modern standards or ancient standards, this is absolutely superb gold work. The honey they are showing here, can I get that bigger? The honey, yeah, this doesn't help. The honey is also granulated. These are highly advanced examples of jewelry. Going back to our discussion, when we're talking about pottery, sometimes people think the more advanced pottery you have, the more advanced civilization you have. Can we also say that goes in other technical areas as well? That might actually go into creating artistic artifacts in this case? In other words, better jewelry? Let's get Minoan pottery if I can find that for you. It's also very advanced. That's not exactly a clay pot, is it? It's got an octopus on it. They decorate these things. If you're taking a look at what they have and what they've done, we have to conclude, if our theory is correct, more advanced pottery, more advanced civilization, that the Minoans are very much advanced. Now let's take a look at some of their frescoes. Some of these have survived, most of which are in tombs. But if you're depicting human beings, remember I mentioned that when we talk about Greek pottery, which we'll come to once again later, when you're depicting human beings, you depict how people act, the kinds of things they do, the steps in a dance, where you sit down to dinner, how you deploy your troops into battle. All of that can be depicted. So you take a look at these things, and you go, what on earth is happening here? Bull baiting? Now these have to be macho people. You got a guy over here, and he's grabbing the horns of the bull. I think that's very dangerous. Bulls are very strong animals. That animal can just wrench its head and throw you all over the place or smash you into the ground. What we think we're seeing are acrobats. You run up to a bull, and the bull's probably charging you. And then you leap at the last possible moment, like this person is doing. You leap over, and you actually put your hands on the back of the animal and keep on flipping. My goodness. Talk about a brilliant sense of acrobatics, no doubt about that at all. So we know a lot about them. One of the ruins which they have is at Knossos. Can I go back and find my map? Yeah, Knossos is up here on the northern coast of Greece. It's a large palace complex. By ancient standards, it's very large. By our standards, it's very large too. Is there anything we can garnish an understanding from their society on the nature of what we find there? We have reason to believe that there's big areas there, largely rooms which were used as granaries. You dump huge amounts of grain in there, wheat. This is very good wheat growing country. It's hilly, it's dry, but since it's hilly and you have breezes coming off of the sea, which is laden with water, and as the breezes come off and there's humidity, there's water in the air, when it goes up to go over these hills, then the droplets come together and you have rain. It's dry, the grains can ripen very nicely. but it also rains frequently enough to make sure the grains live. Could we say one of the reasons why we have so much wealth, obviously, in Knossos and the palace complex, is the fact you have a lot of grain? I don't really think there's any real question about this. Something else we look at the cities, Knossos being an example, there aren't walls outside of them. We do see this very often in the ancient world. For example, we'll talk about Rome later. There are walls around Rome. There are walls around Athens. You live in a violent time. You need the ability to defend. But apparently, the Minoans are living in such a benevolent area, they don't have to defend themselves. At least don't have to go to all the bother of building large defenses. Is this close enough? Maybe I need to get a bigger map of the Mediterranean. To give you an idea of where it's at. Yeah, the Eastern Mediterranean. Obviously, it's a modern map with modern political boundaries. Here's Crete. This is the Minoan civilization. Yes, there is. The civilization does not just exist on this. We find Minoan artifacts. There were towns in various islands around here, even a few over here. Look at the distance here. If you're producing an excess of grain, of course, Egypt does that too. Egypt, one of the great successes of Egypt is that it produces a lot of surplus crops. And in producing surplus crops, people want to come from all over to trade with them. But Crete is close enough that there is very likely some trade going back and forth. And I have read that a few Egyptian artifacts have been found on the island of Crete. So we do have good reason to believe that there was contact, probably economic, probably cultural as well, that made a difference in the development of the Greeks, I keep saying that, the development of Minoan civilization. If we go back to their frescoes, sometimes we look at their artifacts and they look a little Egyptian to us. Well, I'm trying to give you an idea of what we do know about them. But our knowledge is limited because we cannot read their writing. Linear A. There are two writing forms that in the ancient world which we find closest time frame. And one is called Linear A, and the other one is called Linear B. Can I give an example of Linear A? Not linear algebra, that's not going to give me what I want. These are examples of Linear A. I'm not sure if these are, is a syllabary or these are syllables. I doubt very strongly that it's an alphabet. But it is a relatively complex writing system. Now, scholars have been working on this for a very lengthy period of time. And they do believe that they have some of the symbols they recognize, for example, the symbol of wheat. Yeah, I hope that they can continue this effort so we can read more of what they have done. But they're unbroken. Now, the language is unbroken. Now, it would be very, very helpful, would it not, to be able to put these people in linguistic groups. Different languages have different structures, do they not? You and I speak English. It's a Germanic language. When we're speaking in a sentence, you use the modifier, the adjective, before the noun. We don't say the boy tall, we say the tall boy. That's the way we say it. In Romance languages, like French, for example, which comes from Latin, the modifier, the adjective, often comes after the noun. So it's not the blonde girl, it's the girl blonde. You see, the structures of these linguistics are different. If you can identify the structure of a language where you expect to see a modifier, for example, there is a fairly reasonable reason. You can make a pretty good case that you could probably figure out something more about it, maybe even break it. So how many languages would you try? They've tried Greek. It's not Greek. They've tried Latin. It's not Latin. They've tried Egyptian. They've tried virtually every language they can think of and every linguistic group. And apparently it doesn't fit. None of them fit in linear A. From what we can gather, linear A is one of those languages like Sumer, the language that people are speaking in Sumer, that's not related to any known linguistic group. Still unbroken. Make a name for yourself. Break it. Well, what happens? By break it, I mean read it. What happens to the civilization? That's kind of an interesting theory. I mean, we're not terribly surprised over time, and notice the civilization is around for a very lengthy period of time, that at some point that it would either evolve or wink out for whatever reasons. Many civilizations don't really collapse, they evolve into something else. However, as we take a look at the Minoans, we do have a tendency to see that they're around for a long time. And apparently they collapse very rapidly. The question we have to ask ourselves is why? What would be the difference? There is an island in the Aegean called Thera. Let's get do I need a map? Yeah, I better talk about a map. Well, here's Thera. As you look at this, obviously this is a view from it's not a photograph, but it's the layout. Notice it looks a little bit like in the center here, can we say it looks a little bit like a shell crater or the mouth of a volcano? We believe 1200 BC perhaps that this thing exploded. We have very good evidence to believe that it exploded. So I'm going to put Thera on a larger map to show you about where it's at. Okay, it's also known as Santorini. Well, I need to show you where it's at. Well, is this going to help us? Probably not. Let's get back and see if I can find something that's more helpful. Go back to Greece proper. Here we go. Yeah, just off this map, as you can see right here, is Crete. Thera is up here. Now, if you have a catastrophic event like this, that you simply have an enormous explosion, you could imagine the tidal wave that would be involved. There was a tidal wave. It was huge. In fact, archaeologists have looked and seen evidence that this thing actually crashed onto the shore of Crete. One of the ways you can do that is you take little shells, the kind of animals that live in the sea, and you see how far up you see them on the coast. That's probably was left there during this enormous tidal wave that smashed into this. So you get an idea of how deep the water was. Now, I'm not saying nobody got their feet wet, but perhaps one of the best ways of looking at this is that there wasn't enough to destroy a civilization. There certainly wasn't enough to have the water swarm over the island, inundate cities, destroy the area. So I would argue that the tidal wave is not the answer as to destroy a civilization. Another one is, well, it's putting all this ejecta, all this pumice into the air. But the prevailing wind patterns in the Mediterranean, as is the case in the northern hemisphere, is from west to east. While there is evidence of maybe a few inches of this pumice got on the island of Crete. There's more evidence that over here in the eastern area, it could have been a couple of feet deep. So can we say, is Thera, can we get back here? Santorini or Thera, is that the best explanation as to what happened? Now, if you're interested in the theory of Atlantis, there are people that believe, going way back, ancient Greeks were talking about this, that perhaps there was an island that sank beneath the sea. If there's anything to that, they might be talking about Santorini or Thera. Because, well, when it blew up, there's not much left there. So the myth of Atlantis might have some origin back this far. That's possible. Another issue is the Mycenaean Greeks are advancing and moving exactly the same time. Get a map. So the Mycenaeans. Seems like I never find really what I'm looking for. Now, you see, the Minoans are down here and in some of the islands. The Mycenaeans are in Mycenae, their capital, perhaps the most important city, which is up here in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So we do see a difference in culture for the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, largely like this. The question we ask ourselves is the advance of the Mycenaean civilization, where they seem to be expanding in a lot of areas, that in reality maybe they are the reason they had a conquest, came over and destroyed the Minoan civilization. That's certainly possible. However, some people have been wondering, is that really the case? Do we really have good direct evidence this came in? I mean, do we have evidence that cities were burned and that kind of thing? Can we say the evidence is somewhat questionable? But I'm going to argue from a more recent article I've read that there's something else going on here that was just recently discovered. Normally when we think about a civilization, we think about them living down in the valleys. Do you really want to live on a hill? Your fields are down here. You want to be on top of a hill? Walk down every day to take care of your crops, walk down to harvest your crops, put your food back up here. I mean, it's terribly logical that you would not have people who are doing archaeological excavations in places where we don't think people would be. They're going to be down near the crops. Am I out of time? Yeah, I'm getting that way. I don't really have enough time to complete this argument. I hate to leave you in the lurch, but I do plan in short order to complete this lecture in our next lecture. So please excuse me for getting in the middle of something when I could not finish it. Let me come back and finish that argument later on. So I'll put that in my next lecture, and then we'll continue to discuss other issues about the first European civilizations and later get into classical Greece. In the meantime, I'm feeling good, the air conditioning's on, I'm cool. Life is good. It's good for me and always good for you. And I'll speak to you again next time. In the meantime, enjoy.